Today is December the 8th, 2025, and we are studying Parshat Vayeshev. Vayeshev is the best Parsha of the whole Torah. I say this every year. It's my Bar Mitzvah Parsha. I'm very fortunate to have had this as my Bar Mitzvah Parsha because as all Bar Mitzvah Parshas play a role in the life of the people that own them. This parsha certainly has played a role in my life. I think I wouldn't credit my love of storytelling solely to this parsha, but I would say quite definitively this is one of the greatest stories of the Torah, certainly one of the greatest stories of our civilization, on so many levels, just in terms of content alone, in terms of plot, in terms of pure storytelling genius, and the way that the Torah tells the story. This story gives us joy, it gives us sadness, it gives us wisdom, it gives us insight, it enables us to identify certain things in our own lives and in others, as does all great stories. And so I'm very fortunate to have had this parsha, and I think that it's taught me over the years a great deal. And here we go. So Vayeshev, Yaakov. We're going to just start off with the reading of the first little bit of the story, and in a way, you know, this is another way of showing and demonstrating that what we have here is a great, a story that lends itself so much to. I mean, this is a form of biblical interpretation that so much comes out of every single line. Here we go. All right. So, I could chant it for you, but I won't. Vayeshev Yaakov be'eretz migurei aviv be'eretz Canaan. Jacob settled in the land of his father, sojourning the land of Canaan. Ela todot Yaakov. Yosef ben 17 shana haya ro'eh et achav batzon v'hu na'ar et bnei Bilha v'et bnei Zilpa nashei aviv. Yosef et dibatam ra'ah el avihem. Joseph brought a report of them, an ill one to his father. I hope, read along to yourselves in the English as I read the Hebrew. V'Yisrael ahav et Yosef mikol banav, ki ven zkunim hu lo, v'asalo ketonet pasim. He made him an ornamented tunic. Vayiru echav, ki oto ahav avihem mikol echav, vayisneu oto. V'lo yachlu dabro l'shalom. They hated him, they could not speak to him in peace. Vayechalom Yosef chalom. Vayaged le'echav. Vayosifu od tzanoto. They hated him even more when he told them the dream. Vayomar lehem shimuna hachalom hazeh asher chalamti. Hear this dream I have dreamt. V'hinei anachnu melamim alumim b'toch hasadeh. V'hinei Kama lamati v'gam nitzava. V'hinei tisubena alumotechem v'tishtachavena la'almati. Here there was the binding the sheaf in the field, and here the sheaf arose, and here the sheaves were circling around and bowing down to my sheaf. Vayomer lo echav. His brother said to him, Hamalach timloch aleinu, imashol timshol banu. You're going to rule over us? And they hated him even more for his dreams and for his words. He said dreamt another dream. He counted it to his brothers. I have dreamt another dream. Here, the sun, the moon, and 11 stars were bowing down to me. Vayisaper el aviv ve'echav. Vayigarbo aviv. Vayomer lo, ma chalam hazeh shechalamta. He recounted it to his father, to his brother, and his father and his brothers. His father rebuked him and said to him, "What kind of dream is this that you have dreamt? Havo, navo, or shall we come? Ani, v'imcha, v'achecha, tishtachavad lecha arza, to bow down to you. V'yikanu vo echav, his brothers envied him. V'aviv shamar et hadavar." His father kept the matter in mind. And that's as far as I got in the that's basically scene one. It goes on as you know. One second, that the brothers go to Shechem. They start tending their sheep there. Shechem is north of where they are. Jacob says to Joseph, "Go find out what's going on." And that's where they see him. They see him from afar. They rip his coat. They dip it in blood. They send it back to their father. And the father says, "A wild beast has surely eaten them. He is dead. He is torn." And he mourns over Joseph for many years. And Joseph is sold to Egypt as a slave. And that's scene 2 and 3, basically. We'll stop there. Go, Susie, go.
Yeah, so I have two comments. One is that when you see Ve'ela Toldot, I expect a genealogy. And
Yes.
the story of you're getting Yosef, the next to last child, and this story. The other thing is that related to Gary Rensburg's talk Friday night,
Sure.
with all this Vahine, and it directs your attention, as he said, to the movie scene.
Exactly. So we will look at all of that. In fact, we'll look. I don't know if we'll even get to Vihine, but we'll try. I'm going to look at the first few verses and try and understand from both a literary perspective, storytelling perspective, and a textual perspective what's going on here in the story. And you're quite right to point out, and it's one of the things I'm planning to point out. The word todot is a heavily laden word that wants to direct you in certain directions. It's almost I want to say it's almost like in music. And I love using music as an analogy because music is a form certainly of storytelling as well. Melody, and Susie, you know this because you know music. Melody will take you in certain directions. Also, you have certain expectations of a melody. If I go da 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 da, right? So you could say, well, that's very that melody sounds like Mary had a little lamb. But if I'm an artist and clever and good, I could go in a lot of directions from da 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 da, and that's what jazz does, and that's what other music does, and their music is built on an anticipation of certain ways that and places where it will go, melodies especially. And stories also. Stories are built on that. And what is so enjoyable about a story is that it takes us into surprise territory. It takes us, things that we don't expect. Okay, and here's where I'll show you in the text. So we have this text. And Ruth Feinberg, go ahead. Sorry. Yeah, unmute.
I had a question. Okay, so Yosef seemed to tolerate, Yaakov seemed to tolerate Yosef's narcissism and superiority complex over his brothers. He surely must have been knowing what was going on because there were so many sons that he must have known that they had they had it in for Yosef. But it wasn't until the dream with the mother and the father are also bowing down to him. And he said, I don't have the verbatim in front of me, but, who shamar et zeh b'libo, he kept
like,
it. But what was his plan of keeping it? Was he going to tell Yosef he couldn't have dessert that night? I mean, what was the deal?
So you're the audience, and we are all the audience too, and of course we have the ability to ask that question, and that's precisely the story, the tension, the dramatic tension of the story is built on these kinds of questions. Why is he keeping it? And the tradition will take it in another direction, which is that, well, everybody knows everything, that Jacob really has prophetic insight, and there's a certain depth here, and that it's all a ruse. And v'shamar et hadavar means he's going to store it for what will happen later. And in fact, what happens later is something that kind of proves the story, validates the story. Look, I would say in a sermonic way, homiletically, isn't life like that? You and I know people, including sometimes even ourselves, when something is said to us, we remember it quite a long time. I have things, I try to abide by my additional commandments, which include thou shalt not settle scores. That's another, but there are times when people say, things to you that you hold on to, and certainly I have had experiences, from early on, in my life where things are said and I hold on to them. Like, for example, my second grade teacher who said, I have a dry sense of humor. And that has stayed with me my whole life. Marlene Herman, as a teacher.
No, my question has more to do with the fact that the father knew that there was something going on amongst the brothers because he sent him to spy. But then the brothers hated him, and all of a sudden they envied him.
Isn't that something? It's how hate, envy, all of those terrible emotions are all washed in together. They're all mixed in together like a terrible poisonous, brew. And I think that's the effect of the storyteller here, who is telling us both that they hate him and that they envy him. And where does hate begin and envy end, etc., vice versa? And there's plenty to hate about Joseph, and there's plenty to envy in him. And it's interesting what they're envying in him. Are they envying only his father here, or are they envying something else? I'll tip my hat here in the sense that, a dream is, and Gary said this on Shabbat, and I found it very valuable. He said, God speaks to people in several ways. He mentioned three, and I could only remember two. But I think the third is he speaks to them directly, either says something, three is Urim v'Tumim, that God will speak in the Urim v'Tumim, on the breastplate, God will speak through a prophecy, and God will speak through dreams. And there's something very valuable about that kind of idea, which is, the whole Torah tradition, Tanakh, is built on the one idea, the central idea that God is trying to break through to human beings, even though God doesn't need to break through to human beings at all. And it's how you understand that is of course the subject of philosophy. I tend to think of it in the metaphorical way as there's a transmission somewhere and we're the receiver. That's valuable enough, okay? But so what are the brothers envious of? Well, the father loves Yosef, and we'll talk about why in a second. And the father gives Yosef the coat. We'll see what that means. But Yosef is also differentiated in the fact that he has a channel. And in a world where the divine or the dream is valuable, you envy that. I go ahead, Marlene. I'll tell you an
Why
anecdote.
do they internalize this dream as they being something? Are they getting the edges of his dream that they're interpreting that it's them right away? The father says that too. Oh, is
Sure,
it me and your mother? Why
sure.
isn't it something
Why
else?
wouldn't they? Why wouldn't they? And it's in a dream. You're everything in the dream. I'm only smiling because this morning a friend of mine a colleague called me up, and he was laughing and laughing. He knows that this is Parsha Vayeshev, and he said, "I had a dream about you. I had a dream. You were in my dream, and it was a hysterical dream, which I really can't share. But it was just, I hope it's a good dream, and it was just a very funny dream. And we were roommates at the seminary, so I populated his dream, and I said, I'm so honored to be populating your dreams because that tells me that I'm really deep in your subconscious. And so you know, I would say, I would do a little poll here and ask, when was the last time any of you had a good dream? Like a good in the sense of a rich dream. It could be a bad dream that's good also, but or do you remember does anyone here remember anything that they've dreamt lately? And it's quite likely that we have to think, especially since we're all sleep deprived and we have bad, all that. Um, so to have a really, rich dream, there's something I mean, especially if it's puzzling and beautiful. And I would even say, and here I don't want to go too deeply into the sad, but many of us dream of loved ones, and for the moment that we have them in the dream, we do feel that they're next to us. There's a experience of a person in a dream where you just want to hold on to that, and so that's very rich, and you know someone you can envy that. I would also say, just by way, without getting further into this, which is that we do envy people who have extraordinary talents, um, and it depends what that talent is. There's some people who are just extraordinarily talented musically, extraordinarily talented physically, extraordinarily talented with their organization, and go down the list. And so here is a brother who seems to have this extraordinary ability or connection to a divine message. And, we want some of that. They want some of that. Go ahead, Ilana.
Uh, I'm just thinking, how seriously should we take dreams?
Yes,
Is it different at the time of the Torah? And today, I mean, we do, we dream dreams, and after a few hours, we don't think about it
look,
most of the time.
Stanley Messer told me that he was going to be late to the class today, and he was really upset that he was going to miss some of it because he had an appointment. And he says, this is a perfect, parsha for a psychiatrist, because we live off of this. That's what we live off. And the answer is, there's a psychological answer, which is, well, how it's as important as we make them. A dream can change a person's life, and depending on how much you value it, or depending on how, when you wake up from it and you hold on to it, it stays with you. Look, you go to any, I've since I write, sermons, and I write for a living, I consult books on writing. I want to learn how to do this properly. And so many of these books will say, keep a dream journal. Keep a dream journal. And, so you keep a notebook by the side of your bed, and you wake up from your sleep and a dream, and you kind of jot things down. Now, I don't do this. I did this once in a while, upon a time. And if I were to consult that dream, I would be astonished by the things that were in there. And, for people who are engaged creatively, this is stuff that they use in novels and stories and movies, etc. I mean, we have a whole culture that's built on this as a central theme. So uh, j- really important. Okay.
Uh,
Yes, go ahead.
I would think that you decide what you want to do with your dreams.
Absolutely, and that's most of us are not super talented in remembering. I think that most of us have the experience of waking up from a dream and forgetting completely after 5 seconds what we dreamt of, and that's the way the brain is. But if we dream and it stays with us, there's a reason why it's staying with us, and that's what you discuss with a psychiatrist. If that's where you go, or that's what you do with your journal, you go like, what does this mean? And of course, when you start examining your own dreams, you will find insights into yourself. Just one more footnote to this, which is, we're never going to get to this point in the story, but Joseph is in jail with the baker and the butler, and those two have dreams, and those dreams are consequential for those two characters. The baker dreams of carrying loaves of bread on his head. The butler dreams of carrying, having 3 sprigs of grapes, 3 clusters of grapes, and squeezing the grapes into Pharaoh's cup. And Joseph interprets it using those dreams as a kind of foreshadowing for what will happen. In 3 days, he says the 3 clusters are 3 days. In 3 days, you will go back to your post as wine steward to Pharaoh, and you will squeeze the grapes into his cup again. In 3 days, Pharaoh will take you out of the dungeon, and he will take you and hang you. And the birds that in the dream were plucking the bread from the baskets are going to pluck your flesh. Okay, and so he sees the dream as a portent of what will happen, and these things, after all, come to the fore. That's what happens. And my point is that if you read literature of people who have been in prison, you will discover that dreams are really important to them. It's a fascinating thing, and I know that we've talked about it in the past, maybe in this class, that dreams are stuff of prisons. Because it gives them what to talk about. I only read the Sharabi book. It's the only book right now out from the experience of the hostages. I notice I don't think he talks about dreams in the book. I have to reread it and see if he does, but it wouldn't surprise me in the least that he would write about a dream, because what do you do all day when you're a prisoner and you're doing nothing, and there is sleep. You do sleep, and in your sleep you dream, and that becomes the stuff of your mind, and you're thinking about it, and you're moved by it in a sense. Susie, go ahead. I'm sorry.
The last thing,
Yeah.
I was just reading a book about people who were taking LSD.
Yes, LSD.
LSD, and it caused them to imagine and to do like dreaming.
Yes. So LSD, and there's I forget the name of his name is this guy Dinur, right? Katsetnik. This is that book this is called Salamandra. So he has a book about, this is a survivor, Katsetnik, and he has a book about how he went to Holland, I think, and experimented, under supervision with LSD, and it enabled him to go back into the camp experience, and to kind of, it helped him in a way deal with the terrible trauma of that. Susie, go ahead.
So there was another Zoom that I was on. Somebody was talking about, I think it was natural wisdom of people, and he said that there is nothing magical or supernatural about Joseph's interpretation of these dreams. He was a close listener, and he saw in the baker's dream a guilty conscience, and the clear conscience in the cupbearer, and that's why he was able to, there was an investigation going on in Pharaoh's house, to see what was going to happen. What happened. It had to do with food poisoning, I think, and but he could see from the basis of the dream the guilty conscience of the baker, and
Sure. It reminds me of mentalists, and they all say, we're not prophets. We just have an uncanny ability to recognize the way that people talk and behave, and we are able to find those things in them. They're incredibly observant of people, and they're able to kind of channel that into a way of both entertaining and amazing people. And when you read about Joseph here, the one thing that emerges, especially even from the beginning, is that this is an unusual character. He's 17 as we meet him in the story. This is an unusual person. And there are, certainly prodigious people from childhood that have extraordinary abilities in whatever field. It could be, physical, it could be spiritual, it could be musical, it could be, all sorts of ways. And here is one of them. Okay, so let's look at a couple of things, and I'll try and show you, even in the first few verses, how extraordinarily compressed the story is, such that we'll spend an hour on all of Vayeshev Yaakov, even the opening moment here. Vayeshev Yaakov be'eretz megurei aviv be'eretz Canaan. So we mentioned Vayeshev. Vayeshev means he settled here, but I'm telling the story from that as the once upon a time moment. But Vayeshev actually has a context to it. Vayeshev occurs in the book of Breshit several times, and I often like to point out to this program, which is an incredible, a wonderful tool for study that I use, and it's like this here. So Vayeshev this is Ala Torah, and I have the graph of the word Vayeshev. How many times this specific form Vayeshev and Vayeshev with a segol. So we have 95 times that this word appears in the Tanakh. 17. This is the bar graph for how many times it appears in Breshit. When I click on this bar graph, I have all the times that Vayeshev occurs in the book of Breshit. Now, I'm going to pick it up from Avraham, okay? The 8th, in chapter 22, which is end of the Akedah, Vayeshev Avraham be'Beersheva, he dwells in Beersheva. Vayeshev Yitzchak in Be'er Lachai Roi, Isaac dwells at Be'er Lachai, and then in Gerar, and then he dwells there. And then it goes, Vayeshev Esav B'Harsei, Esav dwells. And then it's Ar Vayeshev Yaakov Be'eretz Megurei Aviv. He dwells in the sojourning lands of his fathers. So what that does is it says, I have a story, and I'm going to close this out. I have a story. My story is once upon a time, and my story, just by the first word of the story, connects me to all of these stories about dwelling. And dwelling is a word that tells you that there's an attempt to establish yourself. I dwell at a certain house in a certain address. I've established myself. And yet, here we have, the verse. The verse is, Yaakov settled in the land of his father's sojournings. And so I love the way that this starts, because it says, but it raises a question immediately, Be'eretz Megurei Aviv Be'eretz Canaan. Well, what does that mean? And why is it that it's telling me in this way? Why is it not being specific here? Why doesn't it say Yeshiv Yaakov b'Chevron, Vayeshev Yaakov b'Shechem, Vayeshev Yaakov b'whatever. Why is it be'eretz migurei aviv? And I could ask you that question, which is, if I were to say he dwells in the land of his father's sojournings, that as a listener, what does that make you imagine? So go ahead, Susie.
So the lagur is more transient. So it sounds like his father was a wanderer in Canaan.
Exactly. So,
But Yaakov he settles down. But it's interesting because Yaakov, ends up leaving Eretz Israel, and Yitzchak never left Eretz Israel. But there's this sense of his, maybe from the trauma on that mountaintop. But it gives a sense that Yitzchak was wandering around, but Yaakov settles down.
It does want to give us the sense that he's settling down, but Migurei Aviv actually indicates the opposite, that he's not settled. I think this is what you meant, which is that there is a sense of wandering here, and
Yitzchak
wandered. Yitzchak wandered, and so there's I want to notice the tension here in the lives of the fathers, and when you go back to it, you see, well, Abraham dwelled here, he dwelled here, he dwelled here, he dwelled here. He actually wandered throughout the land. So did Isaac. I just showed you a bunch of things. And Jacob is also, but you get the sense with Jacob that there's a tension in that he really, really wants to settle. He wants to stay in one place, but he's not allowed to do so. And so that's the literary backdrop here, is that there's an impermanence here. And the literary meaning of this is that this story is actually going to be fundamentally based on a sense of impermanence, because we know what's going on. We know what's going to happen. Jacob is going to dispatch Joseph to a wandering of his brothers. They've wandered all the way to the north. And then later on, the story is going to wander itself to Egypt, and that's going to be another wandering. Alana, go ahead.
I was just going to say what Susie said, the difference between lagur and lashevet. Vayeshev means more establishment, like more permanent. It's interesting that it says Vayeshev Yaakov be'eretz megurei aviv.
Yes.
Not be'eretz moshavei aviv.
Right.
So it's like using both meanings of these two words that mean to live. Today we don't say לשבת באמריקה, we say לגור באמריקה.
Right. And it's interesting that what the rabbis do with it, just because we're saying it, migure, they reread the word migure to megayere, which means they were proselytizers. They were bringing people under the umbrella of, under the divine wings of the Shekhinah. In other words, the rabbis are obviously projecting their own agenda here and saying, what were they? It's not they were, evangelists, but they were people that were imbued with God, and they were spreading that to the people of the land, and that gives the rabbis a sense of their own validation of what they are. Okay, I want to just show you something here, because a story has to create an image in your imagination. It's the narrator is conveying a picture to you. This is another great website that I use called hatanach.com. What an original name for a Bible website, hatanach.com. This is the website of Michlela Akademit Herzog, the Herzog Institute in Israel. It's a teacher's college. You might be familiar with it. They teach specifically teachers in Bible in Israel and Jewish studies and other things. And so they have a wonderful website of all sorts of teaching tools, including maps. So I'm going to click on this, and I have to move this around. Let's see how the mapa. Okay, so we get a mapa, and here's the map of Israel. Do you all see that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So this is a map of Israel in the Bible online, and you can zoom into it. And so what you could do with, I don't have to explain the site, but the map is the map that they wander in, and I'm just going to go to the map of this chapter 37 in the book of Bereshit, which is what we're in. So these are the places that are mentioned in this parsha. Look at this, okay? So I'll make the map smaller for a second. So this is the land of Israel. Canaan, Gilad, is the north east. Hebron is in the south. Shechem is in the north. Dotan is further north. Okay, so our story takes place. It says that Jacob dispatches Joseph me'emek Hebron, from the Hebron Valley, which is not exactly clear where he goes, but he has to go to Shechem. The brothers are tending the sheep in Shechem. Now, if you travel today from Hebron to Shechem, you might need an armed escort. I mean, you definitely will need an armed escort. More than just one jeep. This is dangerous terrain. For Israelis to travel in, notwithstanding the fact that there are, of course, Israeli settlements, in all of these areas. But the map is well known to us visually from news. He's going quite a distance when he is dispatching to see his brothers, and then in the later part of the story, the individual on the way says, "What are you doing?" basically, and he's, "I'm looking for my brothers," and he says they went to Dotan, which is another distance. This looks like about 50 to 150 kilometers away. A point is, back to Eretz Migurei Aviv. When Abraham comes, he comes in from Aram, and he comes, down to Hebron. He goes to Egypt, and he comes back, and he dwells in the Negev. We don't have Beersheba here in this chapter, but Beersheba is about here, and you can see that there's a lot of travel. Now, where I would stumble here, and I'm going to close the map, is that this is cartography, and that's a modern science. To what extent people in biblical Israel had a cartographic understanding of their reality, I think, is a big question. I want to say on the outset, I doubt it, because the tools of cartography, and maybe someone will look this up on the internet, they're not till much later in human history. But the point is that the land of Israel plays a role in the imagination, in the storytelling imagination. And directions are part of everyone has a compass. And they do know what north is, they know what south, they know east and west, they know west is toward the sea, they know that east is where the sun comes, etc. Right? Everyone has a basic orientation. And in Israel, in the land of Israel, and here's the advantage, if you live in the land of Israel, so there's a terrain that is mountainous and a terrain that is not. And you can, when you are on a mountain, you can actually look quite far, and you can see things well into the distance. That's our experience. We live in a not particularly topographically rich environment. Central New Jersey is really not rich in its topography. But if you travel just an hour away from here to Hunterdon County or to the Delaware Water Gap, you'll see phenomenal topography. And if you are a person that likes a hike and goes to, on the top, you'll see for miles, and you can understand yourself that way. And the imagination and sight will enable you to picture things there. You will populate what you see with things that took place. Even in America, there's a rich history of things that happened. Go to the Delaware River, and if you just know a little bit about, the founding of this country and the wars of independence, you'll know that Washington crossed the Delaware, and you can go to the Washington's crossing, and they'll reenact it for you once a year. It's coming up, actually, and that plays itself out. And so, how the imagination encounters topography is very, very important. It's encountered in a story, which is our ancestors dwelled, Jacob dwelled in the lands of his sojourning. And so to a listener in the land of Israel, you're talking about where they are. Susie, then Stephen.
Yeah. So they didn't have cartography like we have, but they knew the land. I mean, if you look at quote unquote primitive peoples, they know how to get from here to there. I mean, if I were like to be running around, never mind the military aspects of it, I'd be totally lost. I mean, I can get lost. I've gotten lost in Highland Park, but there are Bedouin trackers who know how to get anywhere. There are in the book Gorillas of the Mist. There's I think it was some political upheaval, and the woman who dealt with the guerrillas, gets separated from this guy this local who is helping her, and he said, you go there. He said, don't worry, I'll find you because I'm a good tracker. And
right,
then a couple of, he said, I told you I'm a good tracker.
These are the information. Information is held in all this different ways. We got Steve, and then Marlene.
Yeah, I want to emphasize what Susie just said. First of all, Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov all traveled, and they didn't seem to have any trouble finding where they were going from Mesopotamia right down to Hebron.
Yes.
And two other examples, Abraham and Lot have to separate because their herds imposed on each other. And Lot had no trouble saying, "Oh, I'm going to go across the river to this other place." And then and Ishmael did the same thing, and there was another one I just went out of my mind.
Look, here's what I would say. I'm sorry to interrupt.
They all knew the topography.
Exactly, and there is an assumption. The assumption that we are operating with as both storytellers and listeners, the audience, is that the audience is well familiar with the surroundings, such that when the storyteller says, Jacob dwelled in the land of his father's sojournings, you go, yeah, of course I know what that means. I certainly know what that means. And look, as Bob points out in the comment to the chat with everybody, that there's a spatial topography and a spiritual topography, dwelling in spiritual spaces of the patriarchs and matriarchs. And the answer is yes, of course we can take it to that level, which is, geography is a great metaphor for the spiritual geography. We all have the journey is itself, the great one of the great metaphors of life. Let me just put into a couple of. I want to go into the human dimension of it. Okay, I'm going to skip this, and I'm going to skip this Toldot. We had a little bit of a talk about Toldot as a kind of cue to here comes a story. Toldot means story, and lots of uses of the word Toldot. Yosef Shva Esrei Shana, he's 17 years old. And that tells us, obviously, something very, very important. 17 is going to be a framing device for the number of years that Jacob is in the land of Egypt. 17 is a frame for Joseph's life. It's not insignificant at all. It's very, very significant. Okay? Now, the chronology of the story is really important. I did this on Shabbat. A lot of people criticize me for getting very picayune in my sheets and stuff. But I want to just point out something that when you start looking at the ages, and I'm going to make this larger here, when you start, a whole story emerges just by looking at the ages of people. Jacob is born when Isaac is 60. Abraham dies at the age of 175, which means that you add 60 to it. Abraham is 100 years older than Isaac, And so Isaac is 75 when Abraham dies. If Isaac is 60 years older than Jacob, Jacob is 15 years old when Abraham dies. When Joseph is born, how old is Isaac and how old is Jacob? Now, these numbers are absurd on some level, but when you do all of the arithmetic, this is what emerges. I'm not going to do the arithmetic for you, but it emerges that Jacob is 91 at Joseph's birth, and Isaac is 151 at Joseph's birth. Why is this important? It's important because Isaac dies at the age of 180. And that means when Joseph is born, and Joseph is 17 years old at age, Isaac is 168 and Jacob is 108, which means after Joseph's sail to Egypt, Isaac lives for another 12 years. That is an amazing piece of data that we overlook, that Isaac is still alive when Joseph is abducted. Now, I've mentioned this, okay, because it adds a dimension of the story that is implied by the text, but is not focused on the text. The story is focused on the drama between Jacob, Joseph, and his brothers. But I want to give a word out to grandparents here, okay? And I'm very sensitive to this as a new grandfather, but I'm very sensitive to this because I'm a grandson, and I live we live in multi-generations, okay? And so what happens in the lives of our grandchildren are part of our lives. And here we have extraordinarily long ages. I mean, that's a subject for a whole different conversation. But it occurs that if you just do the math, you have a whole story that unfolds. That Isaac is alive when Joseph is presumed to be dead. And that is a soul-crushing, heartbreaking piece of story, right? That the child is presumed to have been, demolished by an animal, and the father mourns for the child, and the grandfather is present at the father mourning for the child, meaning the grandfather is present in the knowledge that he has lost a grandchild. Now, who does the grandfather comfort? The grandfather also has his own loss, but the grandfather is comforting both himself, has to find comfort himself, and he has to provide comfort for his son, the bereaved father. And that gives us layers over the story that are not focused on, primarily for, I think, very good reason. I mean, if you told the story from the perspective of Isaac, you stop the story right there. Who could go on? Who could go on with such pain, right? It's bad enough to see it from the perspective of the parent, okay? So the story is really, I mean, I like the way Gary Rensburg, did this past Shabbat. He's talked about the kind of the camera, vihine. The word vihine is a way that tells the listener, take your lens and move it to this. And so what the storyteller is doing is saying, look, we're focused in on this family. We're focused in on Joseph and his brothers, and Joseph and his relationship to his father, and Joseph in the family system. I'm going to just show you another aspect of this and explain here. Okay, wrong. We have 1 second. I'll get. Here we go. No, wrong. It's got to change out of the word. How's this? Do you see what does this piece of information add for us? Yeah, okay. So, he used to tend along with his brothers that's a very odd way of, it's Hebrew is even much more complicated. He was shepherding his brothers. He would shepherd his brothers with sheep. It's not he shepherded his sheep with his brothers. He shepherded his brothers. What we have here is a very, very interesting way that the storyteller is cueing us to the place of Joseph in the family system. Joseph is wedged between the Leah brothers and the Bilhah Zilpah brothers, and because he's differentiated from all of them, he has a unique position. I'll just give you one more piece of information, okay, which is Vayave Yosef et dibatam ra'al avihem. We talked about it slightly before. Joseph brought a report of them, an ill one, to their father. We could look at the word dibah and show that dibah is all about report. The word dibah occurs, interestingly enough, in the spy episode when the 12 are dispatched to spy out the land of Israel. They bring back a report. And here, Joseph brings a report. Who told him? Who told him to do that? And why is he doing that? And the answer is nobody told him. Okay, he wants a certain place of authority in the family. And that's what information does. When you have information about someone else, right, it gives you a certain kind of bond. It builds a relationship. It creates a certain structure of power. I can't tell you how many times, that happens in our lives. It happens in my life certainly as a rabbi. I'll hear something. I'll hear a piece of information that's confidential relating to somebody and their life and, something going on in their life. Nobody is supposed to know that. Okay, confidence, right? But having that confidence enables me to, provide a certain kind of insight or perspective on something, and it creates a relationship. It also gives power of some sort to the person conveying that information. It says, I elevate myself in your eyes by giving you this information and giving it to you exclusively so that you will have it and you will know what to do with it. And that's what's going on here. Joseph, it seems, Jacob didn't tell him, go spy on the brothers. Of his own volition is bringing back information to his father. And by doing so, he arouses the interest of his father, and his father recognizes his unique position. I'm sure his father already knew what Joseph's unique position was, because he's not a child of the concubines, the Zilpah Bilhah, the lower level wives, and he's not a child of Leah, the higher wife. He's a child of Rachel, the beloved wife. So he's already distinguished and differentiated. And now he's differentiating himself, endearing himself, I guess, to his father by telling his father this information. Okay, so does Israel, I'll conclude with this, V'Yisrael ahavet Yosef mikol banav. Israel loved Joseph above all his sons. So I'm asking, why? Does he love him because he's bringing him secrets, or because of love, old age? And I wish I had just one sentence of Gary Rensburg here, but he has an article on what's called it's Janus. Janus is the figure, Janus, the person who looks both ways, back and forth. So in literature, you have, in Hebrew, you can have a text that looks back at something and is referring to it in past, and at the same time looking forward at something else. So what is interesting here, it's, the texture here is the love that Jacob has for Joseph is a love based on his love for Rachel, possibly, but it's also a love based on the fact that Joseph is giving Jacob something interesting and kindling in Jacob his base instinct. Jacob, he develops in his character, and we go through all sorts of things in his life, of course. But at the core, there's a certain kind of quality. He's sly. And this contributes to that. And Joseph then is bonded to his father because of this, not only because this is the child of the beloved wife, but because they have a shared insight. Now, I'll give you one last thing, which is the beloved wife Rachel. Depending on how we read the story, and we may have gone into this in the past, is she alive or dead here? We don't really know. There is a case to be made that she's still alive, and that the stories are not in sequence here. She died in the previous Parsha, but the stories of the dreams could still be taking place while she is alive, because she, in fact, is mentioned in the way that they reproach Joseph. I'm going to stop here. Ilana, go ahead. You've been waiting. And
I just want to go back to what you said about Isaac still being around.
Yeah.
He didn't have much nachat from his own two sons, and now he sees that his grandchildren are not getting along so well the same way as his own two sons. So that's too bad.
Yes, it is too bad, and of course, nachas is something that it's grandparents live for. Susie, go ahead.
Do we know how what the age differences between Benjamin and Joseph?
We don't. We really don't. Okay, so here's where the story is quite enigmatic. The story is enigmatic in not telling us how old Rachel was. Doesn't report to us. It tells us that she died. It doesn't tell us how old. It does. We get a couple of information. I'll just pull that up again, just a second. I'll pull it up again to show you what's going on in the. Oh, I lost it. Here we go. In this chart here. So we don't know how old Isaac was at Rachel's death, Benjamin's birth, or how old Jacob was. And therefore we don't know the age difference. Jacob is 17 at the abduction, but in fact, the story is so compressed. He may have been having these dreams at age 10, age 11, age 12, and we don't have the timestamp on the dreams. The only timestamp we have is that Jacob dispatches Joseph when he's 17 years old. That's it. And then there are other timestamps in the story where, before Pharaoh he's at 30, and before and Jacob's descent to Egypt and his death. All of these numbers, I put them in blue. They're reported in the Bible, and the greens are the ones that you can you calculate from things that are like if Isaac is 60 years older than Jacob, then how old is Isaac and how old is Jacob at certain points in their lives when we know certain things. Okay, anyway, we've gone afield, but I just wanted to do that as a way of we didn't even scratch the surface, but you can see how much digging that needs to be done in a story. And part of the frustration is that when we read these things in shul, it goes by in 2 minutes, and we don't get the whole texture. And stories like this, they're meant to be read and listened and listened and listened to, and you live inside them. And these comments and this whole exercise here is about living inside these stories and trying to understand from multiple perspectives what the experiences are. And by having that, we develop our own empathy, we develop our own relationship with the characters, and we learn in the end about ourselves as well. Bob, go ahead, Les.
Yeah, although you didn't discuss it today, I'm wondering if you have any thoughts, or the commentators have, about what did each of the sons learn from Jacob as a role model, particularly in his interaction with Esau. The commentation was that the brothers copied at least 3 tactics that Jacob used when meeting Esau. Reuben sort of modeled the fact of giving gifts and sort of making peace and acquiescence. The 2, Shimon and Levi, said, let's battle, let's fight. And the third was tefillah, in terms of prayer and leaving things to whatever will come. And so I'm wondering, when they split the camps up and they're young at that point, what did they learn lesson-wise from Jacob?
I mean, it's a great question. It's a great question that you're always in front of your father here, and the father is modeling to you, you get modeled after the good and after the bad, and children learn to look at their parents and see, the honesty and duplicity, and they can learn easily from that. They can learn hypocrisy, and they can learn what truly matters. One of the driving questions in the story of Jacob is, how honest is he? How authentic is he? How earnest is he in the way that he wants to, reacquaint himself and reconcile with his brother? And the tension that we have as listeners and readers of the story is that we're not so sure that he's so earnest. He does say so we give him credit for saying so, and we give him, I'm inclined, in some years reading the story to give him the benefit of the doubt. And then I'm inclined in other years to be very judgmental over him and say, you can't stop manipulating. You're always manipulating. What have you learned? And certainly, if I take the very sympathetic reading of Jacob, I can say that the sons learn to understand him. If I take a more skeptical or cynical reading of Jacob, then I see the sons as becoming exactly what he is, which is deceptive and not particularly respectful, and indeed, in the case of Shimon and Levi, quite violent. In the case of Reuben, does an act with his father's concubine. He sleeps with her. Judah, in this Parsha alone, Judah is quite manipulating and dishonest.
And manipulated
And
with the cloak
Tamar, and absolutely, and so they're real human beings. That's the point. They're real human beings, and we love them because they're. I keep thinking about this, and I say this, when we get to the end of it, Breshit. I really believe this. They're my family. This is my family, and I love my family despite all of the flaws and all of the mistakes that they made. I love them because they're real people. So, all right, on that, let's leave it.